Señores, yo creo que ya es hora. Yo creo que ya es hora que después de tanto tiempo uno se pueda juntar en un sitio a compartir. Y tengo el placer y el honor de anunciarte que tenemos Open Saturday en Santiago, septiembre 3, 2022. Se va a romper esa tarima. Vamos a romper con cosas nuevas que vienen este año. Señores, activo. Este es el primero. Activo.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Estamos aquí, madrugados, cansados, pero la pasión despierta en la madrugada. ¿Tú estás acostado? Revísate, monstruo.
No es una bendición, por ejemplo, yo tengo tenis hoy día, hay personas que no tienen tenis. Yo le puedo dar gracias a Dios por ponerme estos tenis.
Cuentan,
No,
ni
no
los
cuenta.
dual boot tampoco
No.
cuentan.
No.
Es o todo
Entonces-
o nada, binario, 0 o 1. Saturday, falla, 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 candela, falla.
Hay otro grupo que vino a aprender porque necesita conocer una herramienta de la que se va a estar hablando aquí para poder desarrollarse y llegar a un punto B que él quiere en la vida.
Entonces fracasarías por no estar listo para el éxito que te espera.
Van a ver hackers de verdad. Van a ver al Mr. Robot de la vida real. Prepárense.
Entonces, cuando tú tengas ese tren que va despacio, chuchu, en la cartera, cuando tú piensas en la laptop, es como si tú le metieras madera. Y cuando tú le metes madera a la caldera en esos tres, ellos como que van más rápido. Tú sabes hasta cuándo tú lo vas a hacer, hasta que lo logres. No te puedes cansar. Tienes que hacerlo una y otra vez, hasta que te funcione. Un cazador.
Porque acuérdate que la práctica hace al maestro, pero el vicio hace al verdugo. Este vicio, ese vicio, ese vicio.
Puedo decir que lo mejor que me ha pasado, porque he conocido muchas personas, me he podido desarrollar tanto en la manera personal como profesional. Conocí mucha tecnología que no conocía, me inspiraron a seguir estudiando en la universidad, que era algo que todavía no tenía claro si entrar o no entrar a la universidad. Y en una charla en el tercer cumpleaños de Docker, con Víctor, con Jonathan, Dugui, me inspiraron a yo seguir estudiando informática y desarrollarme profesionalmente.
Bueno, la comunidad de niños dominicanos la podemos considerar como una familia tecnológica en la cual podemos conocer distintos tipos de personas con diferentes necesidades y conocimientos y con la disponibilidad de compartirlo en comunidad. Hemos aprendido en todo el sentido de la palabra, en la parte humana, en la parte profesional y en la parte familiar, en pocas palabras, que vemos tus debilidades y atacamos esas debilidades para mejorar tu conocimiento. Hemos picado un par de cositas ahí para los picapollos, como dice Víctor Rey.
Bueno, conocí esta comunidad a través ya de un grupo de Facebook, donde ofertaron un curso gratuito para jóvenes que estaban interesados en aprender Linux. Fui uno de los afortunados que fue seleccionado. Actualmente desarrollo una profesión como administrador de sistemas para una empresa del gobierno de México. En mi carrera tanto profesional como personal he aprendido bastante. Me he relacionado con personas que tienen un conocimiento muy amplio, que me han llenado realmente demasiado. Algo invaluable, se puede decir.
Buenas noches, comunidad. ¿Qué dice la mejor comunidad de la isla?
Buenas noches, mi gente.
Hoy nosotros tenemos múltiples sorpresas, porque tenemos orador y tenemos invitados especiales y tenemos gente que son de nosotros, pero que no siempre están con nosotros, pero que hoy están con nosotros.
Primeramente, y como dice Víctor, hay sorpresas y una de ellas, ya muchos lo saben, el webinar de hoy, la charla de hoy es en inglés. Pero como somos la mejor comunidad de la isla, que el inglés no es nuestro idioma nativo, vamos a hacer un esfuerzo para hablar inglés por ti y que tú puedas disfrutar de este gran orador internacional, reconocido mundialmente, ha dado charla en múltiples países, es instructor con un montón de años.
Pero yo siento un ki en el chat y no es del orador.
Sí,
yo siento unos euros en el aire. Déjame ver dónde. Yo siento unos euros en el aire. Ay. La cocoa, mi hermano Jonathan Montero. Welcome.
Señores, muchísimas gracias. Linux Dominicana, Open Saturday, aquí estamos rompiendo. Señores, me veo en la necesidad de hacer un super mega sacrificio que es al mismo tiempo un tremendo placer. He admirado por años a este charlista, he aprendido con él y tener la oportunidad de tenerlo aquí entrevistado en el canal Primera Charla en Inglés para que ustedes vean cómo es un inglés que muchos podrían decir que es Macao, pero un inglés que está produciendo porque lo estamos haciendo, estamos aquí. Entonces, señores, es un honor, es un día histórico. Estamos contentos, aquí estamos, señores.
Y hoy también Jonathan y Jorge tenemos una noche especial porque tenemos con nosotros parte del voluntariado. Le damos la bienvenida a Luis Collymore, le damos la bienvenida a Diomedes y le damos la bienvenida a Marcos. Así que hoy están el voluntariado con nosotros, es un refuerzo con un inglés pulido por si las moscas. Hoy se trajo redundancia a la reunión.
Un Rey 5.
Hay alta disponibilidad.
Hoy la redundancia tiene redundancia. Hoy aquí estamos en Rey, aquí estamos en LVM, aquí tenemos CTPS, te lo mandamos a S3, te lo mandamos a Backblaze. La copia está en 8 sitios y no se sabe si hay más.
Esto no va a fallar. Así que que preséntense, como que la primera vez que la comunidad lo ve, hablen ahí, digan quiénes son ustedes, dónde son.
Marcos, muévete mano.
Un placer, señora. Mi nombre es Marcos Fermín. Estoy una de las personas, de los líderes que está liderando desde afuera, pero gracias a Dios, sí, encantado de estar aquí. Trabajo en Estados Unidos y al igual que Luis, y estoy a sus órdenes también en la comunidad. Si me ven en Telegram, tírenme y estamos ahí en la orden.
Perfecto, excelente. Luis Collymore.
Mucho gusto, mi nombre es Luis, soy uno de los voluntarios que normalmente está trabajando desde la sombra, como dice mi hermano aquí Marcos. Sí, estoy residiendo en New York, como Marcos también, y nada, si me ven en Telegram, tírenme, yo ando con el banner de desde, igual que si me ven por los emails o las redes. Ustedes saben que pueden contar conmigo, cualquier cosa.
Muchísimas gracias. Y netamente desde RD robotizado, mi hermano Diomedes, mete mano.
Muchas gracias, muy buenas noches. Mi nombre es Diomedes Domínguez, soy uno de los tramoyistas de esta hermosa y bella comunidad. Yo ayudo a mover silla, barro, trapeo, todo lo que sea necesario, hasta pico pollo de vez en cuando. Entonces, aquí estamos para ayudar y apoyar a el resto de la comunidad, en este momento a Jorge, Víctor, Jonathan, en esta tremenda presentación. Que se escuche, que se revienten la bocina con todos los aplausos, la bulla y toda la vaina hasta que los vecinos vengan y me digan que me calle.
Okay. Jorge, mi hermano, cuéntame de ti, dime.
Bueno, ya muchos me conocen, Jorge,
voluntario. No, Jorge, tú no te vas a presentar, Jorge, te digo algo, Jorge, no va a venir tú a presentarte. ¿Qué pasa?
Víctor, son los nervios. Lo que pasa es que tener aquí a todo voluntario con nosotros, tener a Jonathan Montero, miembro fundador y residente en Netherlands, a Luis Culimur, a Marco, a Diomedes, el orador que está ahí detrás, que viene ahora a salir en vivo. Yo estoy nervioso, estoy que se me salen las palabras sin querer.
Pero antes de llamar al orador, tenemos que anunciar la fecha más importante que tenemos en este 2022. Sábado 3 de septiembre. Sábado 3 de septiembre tenemos Open Saturday Santiago.
Por fin, señor, gracias.
Que se caiga internet, que se escuche allí en Amsterdam. Que se caiga, que se escuche allí en Amsterdam. Y comenzamos a anunciar el Open Saturday y ya comenzaron a llegar las bendiciones para la comunidad. Aquí tenemos, señores, un anuncio de empleo para personas que son amantes de la seguridad. No voy a remover a todos y lo voy a entrar de nuevo para que vean aquí. Ah, no, pero yo lo que tengo que hacer es esto. Mira, lo voy a remover. Ese anuncio que sale ahí detrás de mi foto, copien el correo y los datos para que apliquen a ese empleo. Como esto es grabado, usted simplemente tiene que darle a stop al video y ve los datos y listo. Así que un screenshot. Así que veo que el chat activo, veo que hay un inglés sin barrera bueno en ese chat de la comunidad.
Sí, Víctor, antes de arrancar, un saludo, aparte de nuestro voluntario, un saludo a nuestros amigos siempre fijo, a Joel Eduardo, a Tom Meyers, hi, we are going to switch to English into a couple of seconds, a Abel Jiménez, Stanley, un saludo a Andrés Pineda, que lo vimos por ahí, Roberto Muriño, José Quesada, Gaby Liriano, un saludo a Mark Heights. Hi, we're switching to English in a couple of seconds. Y un montón de personas más que nos acompañan desde diferentes partes del mundo.
Maravilloso, maravilloso. Siempre un saludo a nuestro amigo de México que nos escuchan, a nuestro amigo de Colombia que nos escuchan, de Chile, de Argentina, de Puerto Rico, diferentes partes en Estados Unidos. Los amigos de España no lo he vuelto a ver porque me imagino que es tarde ya para allá a esa hora. Pero un saludo para todos ustedes. Creo que de Ecuador también, por ahí andan unas amistades. Así que vamos a darle el honor a nuestro hermano Jonathan.
Mira, dime. Perdón, pensé que te iba a presentar el orador.
No, espérate. Ese honor señores, cuando Jonathan Montero se le dijo que este orador venía, Jonathan Montero se le aguaron los ojos. Ustedes no tienen idea, o sea, hay dos personas que Jonathan Montero ha mirado mucho en esta vida, en la parte humana. La primera yo no la voy a decir porque él se quilla, pero la segunda es este señor.
Víctor, cabe destacar que Jonathan, para todo el mundo lo sabe, para quien no lo sabe, Jonathan está en Netherlands, Holanda, si no me equivoco en español, otra zona horaria, para él son las 2 de la mañana, y él tiene una recién nacida. Jonathan está todos los días que se acuesta a las 3, 4, 2 de la tarde, 1 de la mañana. Él no tiene horario, él está, como decimos popularmente, matado.
El hermano está trasnochado.
Está preñado, él no está durmiendo bien.
Pero él como quiera, este orador, como decía Víctor, me parece importante, le gusta tanto desde sus inicios, que él está aquí hoy presente para estar con ese orador y para estar contigo también.
Ese orador le gusta más que Goku. Y eso es mucho decir.
Tengan cuidado.
Gracias, señores, gracias, señores. Yo estoy buscando, señores, para leer un poquito la introducción del monstruo que tenemos hoy, para tratar, porque la emoción no me va a permitir improvisar.
Hey, cuidado si despierta la niña que está durmiendo en la habitación de al lado.
Me tranqué para no armar eso, porque me sacan esta noche de la casa si hago bulla. Estoy trancado en un área aislado, en donde espero que no haya ruido y poder yo así entonces hacer un poquito de algarabía. Pero aquí estamos. Entonces, señores, díganme, ¿estamos ready? Arrancamos.
Arranca a presentar a tu hombre, dale.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Everyone, we are switching in English in this very moment. So thanks everyone for being here. This is a very important day for us. So in this moment, we're gonna introduce Shawn Powers. Who is Shawn Powers? He's gonna, of course, say more about him. He's a very humble instructor, a very humble person. So he might tell you that he is just a random Joe, a random guy. But that's not exactly the way we see him. He is a very good guy. He's a very good person. He loves Linux. He has a charisma, so to speak, in the way he transmits. I've learned a lot of things with him. So Shawn Powers is a husband. I'm proud of you, man, because I am a husband as well. So that makes me feel pretty good. A father, a trainer. He's an artist, a Linux user. Of course, that's the main things we're here for today. And he's a writer. He wrote some years ago now for the Linux Journals magazine, which is now disappeared, but that was pretty important back in the day. He will tell you a lot of more about him. He's around 50 years young, so he's like a teenager for us. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna leave the other part for him to say about himself. So, having said that, please introduce Shawn Powers. Everybody in their house, todo el mundo en español, chispa, fuego, everybody, sparks, fire, 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 candela. Give a big and rousing applause to Shawn Powers. I cannot make noise. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna be killed. Believe me from my heart and receive this big rousing applause. Introduce him, please.
Welcome, Shawn Powers.
Your life, man.
I can't wait to meet this Shawn Powers guy. He sounds great.
Don't be that humble. You know it's you, man. You know it's you. Thanks for being here, Shawn. It's really an honor. Once again, I repeat that to you. Yeah, the stage is yours. Say goodbye, say hello, say whatever you want to the whole community. Dominican Republic, a big part of it, and the Caribbean and the Netherlands, where I am, it's attending to your words.
Awesome. Hola, buenas noches.
¿Qué lo que? ¿Qué lo que?
About all the Spanish I know, unfortunately. I have no idea what everybody said before we switched to English. So hopefully they didn't build me up too much, because I am just a regular old person. Although I'm not 50, I'm 46. I have several years before I'm 50. So yeah, the introduction was great. I'm a Linux user. I've done Linux training, wrote for Linux Journal. Yeah, I'm a system administrator. I'm a writer. I have a web comic. I do all sorts of strange things. Not many of them are profitable, but they're all fun. So yeah, I want to talk about careers today because my careers have been fairly strange. And as I was preparing for this talk, I realized that most of my jobs have not specifically been Linux. It's just been that Linux has given me the ability to succeed and get jobs that I wouldn't otherwise have. So I'm hoping that this is an encouraging talk. The part of the intro that was in English, the crazy ones, I identified with that. So I'm hoping that we can change the world today, even if it's just a little bit.
Sure, but before we start, some guy in the chat want that we teach you some words in Spanish. I don't know if you want to learn how to say hola in Dominicano. ¿Qué lo que? Repeat after me. ¿Qué lo que?
¿Qué lo que?
Yeah.
That's
¿Qué
it.
lo que?
That's the Dominican what's up.
Yeah, just learn to say what's up. Yeah,
It's a Dominican greeting.
Yeah. If you say que lo que, it's like we gotta give you the national ID.
Repeat after me.
Like
¿Qué lo que?
You deserve it because that's the whole.
And the answer is I'm manso. Estoy chilling.
I think the microphone is making that more challenging for me.
Yeah, basically the answer is instead of saying I'm fine, that would be like the formal way.
Sure, but
you should say like estoy chilling, I'm chilling, I'm fine, I'm what was the word that says Diomedes?
I'm chilling.
Chilling.
Basically the same, yeah.
Repeat after me. ¿Qué lo que? Pingüinox.
Oh boy. ¿Qué lo que? And I already have
Penguins.
Pingüinos.
Yeah, pingüinox. ¿Qué lo que? Pingüinox.
First try.
¿Qué lo que? Pingüinos.
I gotta record
You could have me say
Let's
horrible
start.
things and I would not know.
No, it's a good
No,
word.
no worries,
Let's start, Sean. Let's start.
Okay, I don't know how to make my slides go live, so hopefully somebody can do that for me. Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm all alone. Everybody is left. So now I will speak in German to confuse everybody. Heute ist, no, just kidding. I wanted to talk about my careers because I didn't have a traditional way of getting into the Linux field. I'll start just with a little story about me because I think that especially when people approach my age, they start to think, well, it's too late. I've lost the opportunity to get started in a career, and I assure you that is certainly not the case. When I graduated high school, I went to university, Michigan Tech University here in Michigan, and I was going to be an electrical engineer because they made good money. That was my only motivation, muy dinero. And it turns out that around Calculus 3, they were doing things with numbers that I did not think needed to be done. So what I did is, while I was still paying tuition, I skipped all of my engineering classes and I went to the computer labs and started playing with computers the whole time. It was something that I found I really enjoyed. It was a very expensive way to play on computers because tuition was not cheap. But it was kind of amazing because I don't know if you remember Steve Jobs before or after he left Apple the first time, he started a company called Next. And Next, they were computers based on Unix. And the time that I was in college, which again, you know how old I am, they were just installing. And so the computers that I skipped my classes to play with happened to be Unix-based Next cubes. And that's kind of where I fell in love with computers and networking. Now, I could have just switched majors, but unfortunately, at that time, if you wanted a degree in computer science, the only option was C++ programming. There was no degree in networking. You couldn't, there were just no classes on networking. The only way to learn was to talk to somebody who was in the lab hooking up networking. And so that's what I did. After the second year of college, I actually dropped out, did not get my electrical engineering degree. Please don't ask me to do really hard math. But I left and I started a company that failed terribly. I was a computer repair person doing local networking in my hometown for like real estate companies and anybody who would hire me. But I'm not a business person. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek, and so I did not do well there. However, I managed to get a job at a local community college, and that community college was the only way that local people could get online. They could dial in with a modem to a bank of phone numbers that the community college had, and I was the person that had to make the modems work. And again, those systems were running on Unix. And so, because of all my time skipping class and playing in the labs, I understood a little bit of Unix. And so, I was able to use my poor choices at college to start a job there. Now, it was just entry level. I was answering the phone, teaching people how to connect Windows to the internet because nobody really used Linux at that point. And so my first IT job was honestly supporting Windows, even though I got the job because of my Unix background. Again, it got me the job that had nothing to do really with supporting Unix or Linux. It was supporting Windows. And so after that, I think maybe Jonathan mentioned a car accident. I won't talk too much about it. If you want to hear more about my car accident, you can certainly read my blog, or there's videos about it. But basically, I had a car accident where I hit my head and I forgot my entire life, my childhood, my first child, how to do anything. It was a rough time in my mid-20s, and so basically, I had to start over. So halfway through my fledgling career, I had to start over from nothing. And if you're wondering why I've been talking about Unix this whole time instead of Linux, it's because the only reason that I started learning Linux is because after my car accident, I couldn't work. I was stuck at home trying to heal, and Linux is all I could afford because Linux is free. And that was how I kind of fell in love with Linux. It was because Linux is something I could download. I didn't have Unix. I didn't have Windows. I had a computer that my wife used, and I broke it over and over. And because I was married and she wanted to have her computer back, I had to learn to fix it. So that's how I learned Linux. So a fresh start. After I had already been to university, I had to relearn everything from scratch. So I just want to encourage everybody that if you try hard, you can learn how slides work. There. It doesn't matter where you are currently in life, right? It doesn't matter if you had a false start. It doesn't matter if you're doing something and you're miserable. It's always possible to shift gears and to start something different. And before I talk about everything else here, I just want everybody who might think they're past the time where they can get a fresh start to just throw that whole idea away, because it's just a matter of starting. And the good news is starting can be super fun. Now, the next slide, I promise, is the most boring slide of the evening. But I want to talk Linux up a little bit. And I know that we're all Linux fans, and we're here because we love Linux, or we like Linux, or we're curious about Linux. But why should you choose Linux over some of the other operating systems? And these are all listed here. I don't want to just read a slide to you, but understanding that there are practical reasons that will help you, or practical reasons to choose Linux, like that it's free and it's very available, and it's not language specific, right? It comes in multiple languages. There are documentation of all sorts. You can buy books, you can Google it, you can watch me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that I dedicate to teaching people about Linux. There's so much information out there for you to learn that it really truly is one of the easiest things to learn, even if people tend to be afraid of learning Linux. And that's really the reason that I became a trainer. I'm really frustrated or sad when people think Linux is too hard, because if you're in that point now, I assure you that it's not as tough as it looks. Linux is, the learning curve might be steep, it might be challenging, but it's not any more difficult than any other aspect of IT. And if you learn Linux, it's everywhere. If you want to do Linux as your job, cloud services are all Linux based. Working in data centers means that you have to understand Linux and networking. And understanding Linux almost automatically gives you an understanding of networking, because it's such a server heavy operating system that if you are using Linux, you probably understand more about networking than somebody who is a Windows or Mac user without having any Linux knowledge. So just being a Linux fan makes you that much more employable. And other jobs like DevOps. I've done a ton of DevOps training. It's not on my YouTube channel yet. It's I did that when I worked for CBT Nuggets. I created lots of DevOps training, but it's all dependent on Linux. So whether you want to specifically be a Linux employee or developer or whatever, even if you don't, having those Linux skills makes you that much more employable. And if you don't want to do Linux specifically, that's great. I think that sometimes we love a thing so much, and if we do it for a job, it kind of ruins it. And so it's okay if you don't want to do Linux for a living. And I see people popped up, so they're going to interrupt me. What's up, guys?
Yeah, Sean, we got a few questions right here. First of all, this one is on myself. I just want to say that anyone who doesn't know Sean's story, besides Linux, his personal stories is just inspiring. You can look how about the car accident he mentioned. I briefly, I just want to mention that Shawn had a car accident. He forgot everything he learned. He forgot who his wife was. He had a new baby born. He forgot how to use a computer, and he had to start all over again to learn all those things. I just want to mention that. Sorry, Sean, if I'm too harsh on this part, but I just want to mention that for anyone who is whining that I don't have enough money, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, Sean lost all that, and he started all over again from the beginning. And here he is as one of us, as a rock star for all of us, a Linux rock star for all of us, as a worldwide known speaker, as a family man, and someone that maybe you will see sometime in the near future here in the Dominican Republic with us guys. Besides that, Sean, that was on me. Sorry, I was too hard on the people. I just want to say that in a Dominican way. I have a question right here about someone, Roberto Murillo, asking what was your first Linux distribution that you used?
Red Hat. And I don't know if it's because, I'm certain it wasn't because it was a choice. It was what I had available. It was floppy disks. I think it might have been the Halloween version, which is kind of a famous Red Hat version. Again, it's fairly old, but it was definitely Red Hat, only because I managed to get the disks from somewhere. I don't know where I got the floppy disks. I honestly don't remember, but I know that's how I installed it over and over. And I broke my wife's computer, and she was not happy, so I had to fix it. And yeah, that's.
Allow me to ask you, do you remember how many floppy disks were there?
I don't. I remember there was a stack, but also I remember. So my wife used Windows at the time, and so that was Windows 95, and there was a stack of floppy disks like this high. I don't remember how many there were in Linux, but I know it was far fewer than there were in Windows at the time. It might have just been the one that started, and the rest of the install might have been online. I don't. It's been so long. I'm really getting old.
Okay, I have another question from Joel Eduardo de Cruz Diaz. He's actually asking if what was the first experience while with the kernel panic. Another question is, what was your experience with virtualization, hypervisors, firewalls, and infrastructure in Linux? If you want to answer that today or later, that'd be good.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about virtualization possibly in the next slide even. No, not the next slide, but I am going to talk about it because that's really the first step to learn. Now, when I had my car accident and yeah, Jorge, you talked about,
yep.
I was literally living in my mother-in-law's house, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't work. So, I mean, yeah, it was a rough time. I'm not looking for pity, but rock bottom is when you hit rock bottom, you only have up. So
stop whining, guys. Go to the chat. Go to
no,
Google
that's
and
not
look
what I mean.
For sure. No, I mean that's omission. I'm sorry if I'm being too hard on the people, but that's how Dominican talks. Stop whining, guys. Go to Google and look for Shawn's story, and you will see that anything that you're saying that you don't have time or resources. There's always a way to go over. We are about to go back to background. Before that, I have to give it up to Mark Heights. Sorry, to Tom Mayer, who's on the chat, and he's 73 years old. Go get it, man. You can do it. I got some questions shown from Tom and Mark and other colleagues. I have them here noted for you to ask you those questions in a moment. Okay, so Victor, whenever you're ready, please take it to the background.
It's just me again. I kind of lost my train of thought. I don't remember where I was. I think I was getting ready to switch off of this very boring slide. But my point here was that Linux doesn't have to be exactly what you do. It can be anything. I also don't know. So when they come back, please remember, I'm curious about are libraries as prevalent in the Dominican Republic as they are here? Because I use the library a lot for resources. They didn't have great books, but they had some that helped me at least figure out how I broke the computer. And back in the time, somebody asked about a kernel panic, and I don't think I answered that. The one thing that I specifically remember is in the early days of Linux, trying to get hardware to work, you had to set specific interrupts with jumpers, like on the serial cards inside the computer. It was not a simple time in the world of computers. And I remember lots of kernel panics. I talked about breaking my poor wife's computer, and I did, trying to make all those things work. It was a crash course in how to make computers work. And there's something else that has recently happened, I think, that is a benefit for anybody who's looking to get into an IT job. And this may be one of the most depressing slides of the evening, but I mean, we're all familiar. I'm here virtually because of COVID-19, right? Ideally, in a perfect world, I would be in front of you on stage, and we could interact. I still need a translator, but we could interact in a way that is more personal. But while COVID-19 and the pandemic has been terrible, and I've lost people that are close to me, and it's created a divide here in the US that will probably take generations to heal. Some benefits happened, right? Some good things happened. For example, remote work is possible. Now, those of us who have been working in IT have always known that remote work is very practical and wonderful. However, the pandemic forced companies to try it, and it turns out that it's been wonderful. And so I'm grateful that out of something as horrible as the pandemic, we get things like the ability to work remote. And unfortunately, even though it's more practical and it's more affordable for companies to hire people remotely, that doesn't always translate to opportunities like it should. I'm sure that people who are listening, especially those in the Dominican Republic, know that it doesn't mean equal opportunities all over the world just because people can work remote. Unfortunately, it means that some companies are taking advantage of people who live in other places, trying to pay them peanuts. That's very, very unfortunate. I hope that changes as remote work stays the norm. I'm hopeful that as we expand the virtual workforce, that competition makes it so that companies realize that if they want to have the skilled workers who happen to live in other places, they're going to have to pay good wages for that to happen. Because I'm certain that I am no better at my job than somebody in another country. And so companies know that too. They're just, unfortunately, right now, getting away with things. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today. When I said, let's change the world, in response to the intro, I mean it. I really hope that because of this huge change that we've seen globally, we can actually start seeing change in people's lives as it pertains to jobs. And so what's our first step there? Honestly, me being here is huge. I am honored to be the first speaker who is giving a presentation to this group in English. It's a little intimidating because I'm not bilingual, and I feel a little bit intimidated by people who are seem much smarter than I am because they can speak more than one language easily and fluently, and I'm a little bit jealous. So I'm very humbled and honored to get this opportunity. But I think that it's important for us to realize that if we want companies, especially US or European-based companies, to look, out, speaking English is very beneficial. Speaking multiple languages obviously is even better because you can facilitate communication in a way that somebody who only speaks a single language is unable to do. And look, I live in the US. I'm as white as I'm almost clear. I'm so white. I'm a male. I have so much privilege here and I understand that. But also I fully realize that it is not fair that English has become kind of the standard international language for communication. I'll be honest, I am so lucky because if that wasn't the case, I would have a much more difficult time on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know how many Star Trek fans there are, but I look forward to the day where we do get the universal translators, because in Star Trek world, different languages aren't really an issue. And I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't want us to move to a standardized language. I certainly don't think that is the answer, because there are so many things that can be expressed in different ways in other languages. I'm trying to learn Spanish. I am really not good at it. If we go to a restaurant, I could order you a fish burger, hamburguesa de pescado, and you would have to order everything else because I just don't know the words. But all of the different languages we have in the world are so vital because it allows us to express ourselves differently. But also, I think that we see the world differently, and when we communicate. And so, again, I know I'm being a little bit philosophical here, but I hope that there is a way that we can communicate between languages better. But I certainly don't want it to be by abandoning everything but a single language. So anyway, it feels silly for me to be talking about languages like this as a non-bilingual native English speaker. It feels very presumptuous. However, I do think that at least right now, speaking English is extremely beneficial for being in the workplace. And also, I'll mention this too. So the folks that I've been speaking with, like before we started, who can communicate in English and Spanish, the ability to translate and be able to pass ideas back and forth is so vital. So if you are bilingual, and if you're listening to me and understanding me, you almost certainly are. that is such a vital thing that I hope more companies start to embrace, in that they want to hire people who have the ability to clearly and efficiently communicate in multiple languages. So anyway, I will stop with the language part. It's clear that that I am not as knowledgeable as almost everybody else listening, but I wanted to mention it, particularly because I'm the first English only speaker that's presenting. So again, thank you for that opportunity. And as this, I mentioned that almost none of my jobs are specific, or that I've had are specifically Linux. And so first of all, I'll just talk about like my current day job is actually Linux specific. I am a system administrator for multiple data centers in the Western states here in the US, like 5 or 6 data centers. And I manage Linux computers in there. Specifically, they're mining cryptocurrency, which I really don't want to talk about cryptocurrency, but the servers themselves are running Linux, and that's where I'm doing it. However, before that, after college, like I said, I supported Windows computers, and it was my Linux and Unix knowledge that allowed me to get that job and do it. My first career job, and by career job, I mean a job that provided health insurance and a salary, a regular salary, was at a school district. Now, the school district did not have any Linux whatsoever. They're a Macintosh-based school, and I did not even have a Macintosh to practice on before I interviewed for the job. However, because I had Linux as a background, I was able to start up a PowerPC emulator, run a very old emulated version of Apple. And when I was interviewing at the school, I was able to tell them, now I don't have a Macintosh computer, but I've been working with Apple stuff via emulation, and so I can answer some questions. So even though I didn't have Macintosh skills, I was able to get a job. I worked there for 12 years. When I was there, we lost tons of money. There was a budget issues in schools here in the US, not a fun topic to talk about, but basically we had no money. And so I was able to provide computers for the students using Linux thin clients that were donated computers from other schools that were throwing away their old hardware. And so I took that and I said, you know what? Because I know Linux, I can get kids in front of a computer in the classroom. And so even though the school had never even heard of Linux, my background made me far more useful to the school and to the students. And, we were able to do some amazing things there. After I left that school, I went to a university in the same state, but I got a job as, now, if you know my background is mostly Linux, you're probably going to be a little surprised here, but I was the manager of the database department at a university where they used all Microsoft SQL servers, and I was in charge of a group of developers, and I had never done any development whatsoever. But during the interview process, they said things like, well, I mean, if he can do Linux, he can do anything. And so it was because of that that I managed to get this job at a Windows environment. So if you don't want to do Linux specifically, that's okay. And the guys are back. So please interrupt me.
All right. So we have a lot of questions right now coming through the channel. I see that Mark Hedges says that I love Linux, but I'm curious if you will touch on age discrimination. I've loved to start a new career, but I'm already in middle age.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, truly, I say that jokingly, but it's very true. I think that age discrimination, this is another thing where it's possible that remote work will help. It's a really bizarre situation where I think when you're applying for jobs, it's difficult to get past the automatic part of the job application process. If you get filtered out by the robots or the whatever algorithm decides if you get to talk to a person or not, that seems to be the toughest part, because I think that as somebody who's more mature and knows what they're talking about, is a little more confident in not knowing things. I mean, that's, being able to say I don't know with confidence is huge. So if you can figure out a way to get past those automated parts and actually talk to a person, an interviewer or recruiter or whomever, I think that getting that personal conversation is really the goal at first. And so, your resume has to tick boxes so you don't get rejected. But I think once you talk to somebody, that age discrimination, there's two parts to it. One, people don't want you because you're old. But I think another part that we struggle with is generally when we're getting up there and our hair is either falling out or turning gray or both. I think that people don't want to pay us as much as we're worth. They want to pay somebody just out of college who they think deserves less money. And so it's difficult to have those conversations, but I think the best thing to do is be upfront with the human beings once you get to that point. I don't have a great formula for getting past the automated sections, though. That's know somebody, as sad as that is. If you have a connection on LinkedIn, try to connect with a human being. That's really vital. That's what makes this special, right? We're just human beings connecting with each other. And the same thing with getting a job. I hate to say that it's who you know, but sometimes who you know gets you talking to somebody who you don't know, but you'd like to know.
That's right. So to add a little bit to that is nowadays, this is what we're doing now. That has become the new trend, the standard, that you need to network, know somebody who can get you in contact with somebody else. Because if you click apply in a job posting, you might have to go through the filters of the system, and then you have to modify your resume in order to make it look or make it go through, so you can talk to somebody on the other side. Yes.
Yeah, that, and honestly, groups like this are key. If some of the people in this group are working for a company, that's an in. That's, you'll know if they're looking for somebody, and you can get recommendations. And it's weird that LinkedIn has become such a powerful place to connect. I know that's what it was designed for. It's just weird how much companies rely on those actual connections. A friend of mine recently made connections because of a LinkedIn connection from a friend that they knew. So I guess be friendly, make lots of friends, because it can be the difference between meeting the person you need to in person and not.
Yeah. Also, Sean, I got here another question from Joel Eduardo. He wants to know, have you ever implemented an all-based Linux infrastructure, including firewalls, hypervisors? And also another question he has is, how have you solved kernel panics? Those are two questions in one.
Okay, so I touched a little on kernel panics with it used to be really tough. They're not as common anymore. If you have a kernel panic right now, you probably have faulty hardware. I'll be quite honest. Right now, a kernel panic probably means you have a bad memory chip, or you have a failing motherboard, or something's not seated properly. The days of kernel panics because of misconfiguration are not nearly as common as they used to be. As far as virtualization, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next webinar you have is somebody talking about Proxmox. Is that true? Yeah, see, Proxmox is awesome. And I do talk about that in probably the next slide. I tend to get long-winded. So, but I do talk about how to get started learning stuff if you're kind of new to it. And so, oh, they left. So it's back to just me. Yeah, if you don't want to just do Linux, again, my jobs, going through my list of all my careers here, even my job at Linux Journal was not because I was a Linux expert by any means. It was because I was a decent writer, and the stuff that I wrote about was interesting to people who had similar interests. So it really isn't just Linux. Linux can be this vehicle to a wide variety of other opportunities, like creating video training. I've created video training on Linux, but also DevOps. And I mean, if you look at Linux journal videos from way back, I've done some silly things, tech tips that may or may not have had anything to do with Linux, and reviewed silly products and all sorts of stuff. Having that background of Linux just makes you more employable and more versatile. And I think here, yeah, because the secret is, here's my next slide, is that Linux isn't what I do, it's how I do what I do. And so I put it at the top because it sounds subtle, but it's really important. Everything I do uses Linux, but it isn't specifically that I'm a Linux user. It's just how I solve problems. And every single job is the same. There's only one job, and it's problem solver. So for me, a lot of the problems that I solve them with Linux, because that's what I know. And Linux gives me some versatile tools to solve those problems. But think about it, every single job that's out there. If you're a cook, you're solving the problem of people being hungry. If you're a waitress, you're solving the problem of people needing food brought from the kitchen. If you're an app developer, you're solving the problem of having a great idea, but needing somebody to be able to click and use that great idea. If you're a doctor, you're solving the problem of somebody being sick. Every job is a problem solver. And so when you have a wide variety of tools that you can use to solve problems, specifically in IT, it makes you more versatile, and it gives you the opportunity to do multiple jobs. If you get tired with one thing, you can move on because you have those flexible tools that allow you to do things. And the reason I'm so passionate about Linux is just because it can solve so many problems. Like I said, when I worked at the school, sorry, I'm starting to talk fast, I get excited. When I worked at the school, the problem was they had no money and they needed students to have access to computers. And Linux gave me the ability to solve that problem by using free thrown away computers that other school districts just threw away. And so why do I teach Linux? Because it teaches you to troubleshoot. The questions about kernel panics. If your kernel panics, you have to figure out why. You have to solve that problem. And Linux gives us the opportunity to not just solve Linux problems, but learn how to troubleshoot, right? If you can't ping a server, you need to think through, okay, what is happening between me and the server? The first thing to check is going to be the easiest, right? Is my network cord plugged in? Check for the blinky lights on the back of the computer. And those troubleshooting skills that you have to learn when you're doing Linux translate to an ability to troubleshoot everything, right? If our vacuum cleaner in our house doesn't work, the skills that I've learned fixing Linux help me to cut the possible issues in half. Like, okay, I'll look to see if there's a clog. If there's no clog, then I can eliminate everything south of the motor, right? And then those troubleshooting skills make us more employable, but honestly, they make us better people in general, right? Better spouses, better citizens, better at everything that we do. So, whether you are passionate about, cloud virtualization or whatever you are passionate about, those skills you learn are going to translate. And I'm really behind. I don't know how long we're going to have here, so I might have to skip through a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about. But if you want to learn Linux, I know a guy. No, yes, I teach Linux, and a lot of my stuff is on YouTube, and there will be more and more stuff on YouTube. But I didn't have YouTube when I learned Linux, right? What I did is I played. I had a lot of fun, and things that interested me are the things that that kept my interest. And so I learned Linux by having fun. Okay, I don't know if War Games is a movie you're familiar with, so I put the DVD there. But the whole idea of playing is vital, and because yes, you can learn from me, you can buy books, but I want to talk to you about how I learned so much about Linux. It was not the traditional route. First of all, you can do things like the idea of virtualization has come up quite a bit, right? And so the first thing, if you want to learn Linux, is to set up virtual machines, because there was no such thing as virtualization when I learned Linux. I do not recommend that you break your spouse's computer and fix it. She did not like that. So virtualization gives you the opportunity to have a sandbox where you can play. And if you ruin stuff, you just delete it and start over. And there's a couple different ways. VirtualBox is open source. Most of the parts of it are open source. It runs on your local computer. You're probably familiar with VirtualBox. This is a great way if you only have the one computer, where you can learn to set up and tear down computers and set up networking without the need for anything other than whatever type of computer you have. Now, if you have a spare computer, something like Proxmox, which is my very favorite virtualization platform, allows you to do even more things, because it's running on a remote server. So you have to learn networking even more. You have to rely on your ability to connect over the network and redirect ports and figure out hard drives and virtualization of your internal stuff. It's just so cool. I'm excited for you for next month. The talk on Proxmox should be amazing. But I love it. And the nice thing about using Proxmox is that you can still connect to the virtual machines, even though they're not running on your computer, just with a web browser. And I think I have that in a slider. Yeah. So this is actually a glimpse at my local Proxmox server that's in my house. It's literally in the basement below me. And this is just where I do things see, I have a Caddy server. I have videos on Caddy. If you haven't used that, it's a web server and reverse proxy. But I have all sorts of things here. And the nice thing is, here, I think I'm going to click again. If you are in the web browser, you can still see the console. Even if it's a graphical environment, it will use VNC inside your web browser, so you can control all of those computers. It's just great. Proxmox is amazing, and you can do clusters and failover. And I have a set of 3 really nice rack mount servers that I'll be setting up as a Proxmox cluster. So I encourage you to follow my YouTube channel, because it's going to be fun to show how they fail over and stuff like that. But that's another whole talk. And that's actually somebody else talking next month, so I don't want to ruin stuff for them. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that in Proxmox, it allows you to use containers, and not Docker containers. I mean, you can see on my server here, I actually have a virtual machine called Docker, and that's where I run Docker containers. But Proxmox allows you to do an LXC container, which is a very efficient container, but it runs like a full operating system. So you can have a bunch of them running without overtaxing your virtualization platform. It's just a great way to take advantage of even slower hardware. Even if it's an old computer that you're installing Proxmox on, you can still get some really great use out of it. And so some of the things. So this is Linux specific. Now, these are just apps that you could install on your Proxmox environment. And these are just some of the things. I looked around in my office, like some of the projects that I've been doing. Things like Caddy, like I said, it's a web server, reverse proxy. It does SSL automatically. DNS mask is something that people don't talk about very much, but it's more powerful than it seems. Yes, it's a DNS and a DHCP server, but you can actually boot computers from it using TFTP and Pixie boot. And I know that's starting to get really complicated, but it's amazing the things you can do with DNS mask. It's one of my favorite little programs that people don't talk about a whole lot. URLs, it's like a Bitly. You can host your own URL shortener, Uptime, Kuma, MB, Plex, Jellyfin. All of these things are fun projects that I encourage you to look up, because you can install them locally. troubleshoot them when they break, because they will break. They can be really complicated. And then you have that knowledge that you can use. And honestly, installing stuff is one of my favorite things to do. I have a lot of fun doing things like software. And so I saw the comment pop up, and it's in English. Thank you. Ricky, my favorite Linux distribution, honestly, is Ubuntu. I'm a big Ubuntu fan. I used to be a Debian user, but Ubuntu just made everything easy. And I know there's been some controversy, but I still use Ubuntu for most things. Yeah, so that's it. Anyway, checked all of these programs out, but even these are not how I learned all the things that I know about Linux. For me, it was maybe a little bit more silly in here. If you are not familiar with Linux Journal, this magazine, actually back there, I know I'm a tiny thumbnail here, but hanging on the wall there is this exact cover, because it was the first time that I was ever professionally published. And it's not because I was a Linux expert at the time. It's because I built an arcade game because I thought it was super fun, right? I built a MAME machine because when I was a little kid, I grew up as a poor kid. I couldn't go to the arcades. I couldn't afford to go to the arcades, but I always wanted to. And so as an adult, I decided I'm going to build my own arcade machine. And I did, again, because I knew Linux. I used Linux as the operating system underneath, and I managed to write an article and get published. I ended up getting a job at Linux Journal. I think some of the Linux Journal folks from back in the day are actually in the chat now. I won't call them out, but it changed my life because I was having fun making an arcade game. And if you look, so I didn't have a garage at the time. I actually built this arcade machine in my bedroom, and my wife was not thrilled because I had to like cut things with saws, and there was sawdust in our bedroom. She was really not thrilled. But throughout this process, I not only learned how to get Linux to start a specific application on boot, I also learned how to solder. I learned how keyboard matrices work. If you can see that rat's nest of wires, I'm sorry, I'm starting to talk fast again. If you can see that rat's nest of wires, that's trying to figure out how a USB keyboard matrix works so that I could set up the buttons to go to specific keys on a keyboard, because there was no such thing as a joystick keyboard controller at the time. So I had to figure all that out. I tried not to solder because I'm not good at it. And I learned that you really should solder, because if you just tape things up, they don't stay together very well. I learned as much what not to do as I learned how to do stuff. And that actually, like I said, it changed my life. It got me a job at Linux Journal. And I didn't stop there, because having fun is how I learn best. And so after I did that arcade game and I started working at Linux Journal, I went even further, and I relived my youth by creating an emulation box, right? If I'm sure that a lot of you have played with Raspberry Pis. One of the best things to do with a Raspberry Pi is to create, I think that RetroPie, I think that's the name of the software that works so well. And all I did is put, a Raspberry Pi in a cigar box. But when I did this, I had to learn again to solder better. You'll notice in the picture here, I have one of those soldering things with like clips on it. That's because when I made my arcade game, my wife had to actually hold stuff, because I don't think a person can solder with only 2 hands. It takes me 3 hands. And so if I didn't have like the little clips holding, I had to use my wife to hold, a wire for me. Anyway, I learned all sorts of things in this process, including how these digital controllers work. It's like this digital signal for Nintendo controllers. All of that has made me a better Linux user, but problem solver. And I just understand how things work better because I had fun. And that's really key. At least for me, I have to have a lot of fun. For example, if you look, and I won't belabor this too much, but do you see on the front of the cigar box, there's a light that's on? The power button has a light in it. I thought that was really nifty. I burned out about 5 of them because I didn't know that the Raspberry Pi offered 5 volts and the light in the switch could only handle 3. And so I learned all about how resistors work. So then I stopped burning out the lights. And so, yeah, just having fun like this is really important. And I think my last one, yes. So I have just one last project that became kind of a regular feature of Linux Journal, but had nothing to do with Linux whatsoever. BirdCam. If you are a Linux Journal reader, you know that I love birds. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you a live version because this year apparently there's a bird flu that is going around, and so at least here in this part of the world, we're not supposed to put out bird feeders because if they congregate, they will get each other sick. I thought about putting little masks out for them. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm not feeding them this year, but I love feeding birds, and so I started putting out cameras, and I would use Linux Motion. It's a software that controls cameras and records motion. And then I set up a web page, and then that web page ended up like, oh, what if I actually streamed this live? And so for years, I've had a live stream of bird feeders. And then at the end of the day, I have a script that would compile all of the motion that it detected into a single archive of the birds for that day. And so my YouTube channel, and not my YouTube channel, but another YouTube channel that I had, would automatically post all of the bird movement from that day. And so if you go to my Birdtopia YouTube channel, you can see that every day there was an archive of all the birds that visited the feeder. It was so much fun and had nothing to do with Linux other than, since I loved birds so much, I decided to use the tools that I knew, Linux, in order to do that. And a lot of the things that I learned there became video tech tips that we published on the Linux Journal YouTube channel. And those video tech tips, which we released on DVD, I probably still have some around. I should look at those. They could be worth a lot now. But it's those videos that we created that got me the job at CBT Nuggets, because CBT Nuggets is a video training company, and they knew that I knew how to do video because of the videos that we did at Linux Journal. And so even though the videos weren't necessarily Linux related, they saw all of the video stuff that we did and offered me a job teaching with video at CBT Nuggets. Again, all of these things that I'm talking about aren't necessarily Linux based, but because Linux is my tool of choice and I'm passionate about Linux and I love using Linux, it's allowed me to do a lot of things and make myself valuable in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And so, yeah, I think I just have one more slide here, guys. I promise I'm almost done talking. Yes. And so, me right now, this is, I guess, the part where I talk about myself briefly. What am I doing now? I'm not working at CBT Nuggets right now. I have my own YouTube channel. I'm releasing videos. I encourage you to, if you want to learn more about Linux, subscribe. If there are things that you would love to see training on that isn't out there, let me know, because I love teaching, especially challenging things. I love making it easy to understand. I write blogs, and I'm really interested in Home Assistant because all the time we've spent home over the past couple of years, I wanted my home to automatically turn lights on and off and all of those things that home automation can do. So, and those are the characters from my comic. So anyway, yes, thank you. That is my YouTube channel. Anyway, that's what I'm doing now. I'm curious. How about you? So you're a Linux fan, or you wouldn't be here. How is Linux helping you make a difference in the world? Get you a job / career that you enjoy? And is it changing your life? And I guess with that, I'll leave it open to questions again. So if the other people can come back, I will happily talk more. But I did get to my last slide. So
Well. Thank you, Sean. It's been an intense presentation.
Amazing presentation, Sean.
A
Really
lot
good.
of good stuff going on. A lot of good and nice, interesting projects as well. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So what do you think, guys? What do you think?
Amazing.
Awesome.
Virtual chat.
I have a quick. We have a few questions, guys, for the audience here. The first one would be besides Fluxus, what type one hypervisor do you like to use?
So I've used multiple hypervisors. When I worked at the school district, we used ESXi. We didn't use the paid version. Again, the school was really hurting for money, but we just used the free version of ESXi. Proxmox, I don't think existed then. I'm a big fan of Proxmox now because it's open source. It's so powerful, and it has a lot of features that if you wanted to use in something like ESXi, you'd have to pay for the features, and Proxmox just allows you to do those, like high availability and failover and Ceph file systems. I mean, you're going to hear a lot about it next month, I know, but the reason I'm so passionate about Proxmox is because it's so awesome.
I have a question here from Abel Jimenez. The question is, which Linux certification do you recommend, Shawn Powers?
That's a great question. I didn't talk about certification, so I'm glad somebody asked.
Yes.
Yeah, so for the past 10, 12 years, I've been making lots of videos for CBT Nuggets based on certifications. I actually, if you look at my YouTube channel, I talk about the certifications in a recent video, but off the top of my head, I think if you're not familiar with Linux at all, I encourage you to look at Linux Essentials just because it will introduce you to concepts with Linux. But I don't think getting that certification is really beneficial because Linux Essentials is just a way to introduce you to Linux concepts. If you want to get something that proves you know what you're doing, especially if you're trying to get past those automated interview robots, something like Linux Plus from CompTIA. I like the Linux Plus exam a lot. I was part of the beta test for their new exam. It's a single exam. I really like how they do it. I like the questions they ask, the way that they have you do things in like actual responsive virtualization a little bit, but it's a very practical exam. The other one that is comparable is LPIC 1 from LPI. That's actually 2 exams. Several years ago, they used to be the same. CompTIA did not have their own exam at all. If you took the LPIC 1 exams, you could get Linux Plus certified, but now it's separate. And the reason I like CompTIA is it's one exam. The CompTIA name is known even if it's not a Linux specific company, right? I mean, if it's a company that is familiar with Windows and Cisco and all of those other companies, they're going to be familiar with CompTIA as a certification company. Whereas it has to be somebody specifically familiar with Linux for them to appreciate maybe the LPIC 1, LPIC 2, that sort of a thing.
Yeah. There's another question from Carlos Maestre from Colombia. And this is a really cool question because this is like the boogeyman of everyone who's actually going to Linux. And he's asking, what are your recommendations for people new to Linux? Do you think it is necessary to teach the terminal, how to use the terminal?
So it depends on what you want to do. You could be like a cloud engineer and do everything in a browser, like get AWS certifications and stuff. And you could be using Linux and never know it. Even though it's running Linux underneath, you might never need to know that. My recommendation though is yes. The same thing with DevOps. I think a lot of the DevOps tools you can use just by following like instructions and like copy and paste. But if you understand what's happening underneath, it makes you invaluable because when something goes wrong, you know what those DevOps tools are actually doing. If you're using Ansible, you can just type things and make those playbooks and they'll work. But when they don't work, if you understand what they're actually doing, you can troubleshoot those much better. So yes, if you're new to Linux, I really recommend the Linux Essentials course. And this sounds self-serving. I do have a complete Linux Essentials course on my YouTube channel. But whether you watch that or get a book or whatever, it's a great entry into Linux, because Linux has a steep learning curve, right? If you're not familiar, it's overwhelming. And Linux Essentials, their stuff is designed for people who don't know Linux to get an introduction. And it does introduce the terminal. It does introduce some basic command line tools. So that's my recommendation for a first time user.
Something to say in that sense, Shawn, is that we usually make the differentiation of getting certified and knowing about a topic.
Yeah.
Those might be the same, but they are not.
They don't have to be, right? That's for sure.
They don't have to be. It's like, you can find a dump of questions around the internet and just get the certification, but that doesn't mean you have experience. So there's an ethical part into this. So it's important that you learn the things. So first you go through the learning process, and then you can get ready for the certification exam. So that should be like the natural order for this. But yes, it's good that you bring up that topic.
Yes, and to expand on that, you're absolutely right. It is possible, like, to get the exam dumps or whatever, where you get the answers and you just memorize what questions you might be asked. But you're only hurting yourself, because what if you get the job?
Definitely. Yep.
Then what?
Yeah,
So
that's when it becomes a problem.
There's no dump that can save you from that.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Well, I think it's the time to announce an important information. We have 30% of discount code from Linux Professional Institute for the whole people, the whole assistant for the Open Saturday event. 30% of discount to take the exam of Linux Professional Institute. Thanks to Linux, to LPE, Linux Professional
LPI, Professional
for the
Institute.
support to our community. Thanks.
Can I add too? I didn't know this, but somebody told me on my YouTube channel. I think the LPI has released something. No, LPI, that is where they have the Linux Essentials. Is the code specific to one exam, or is it is the discount regardless what?
This is a discount. I don't know. Is for take whatever exam.
Okay. Very cool.
Well, if you guys are there, I know you are there, and you have liked the Shawn presentation. We know you did. Please go to his YouTube channel. Yahid already shared his YouTube channel in the comments. Like his channel, comment on his videos. Shawn has any kind of video you may need. He has from Linux newbie level. If you are new to Linux, you can go to Shawn's channel and you will find some Linux introduction videos, and also you can find high-level Linux videos like maybe you and I will need. And go to his channel and show some love to Shawn.
And tell me what you want. Yeah, tell me what to make.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Shawn is over there and always listening. Shawn, we got someone from Honduras.
Another question.
Oh, sorry, guys, go ahead.
It's okay. No, Roberto was asking if you have if you have ever had to work with BSD servers. I think about your experience with that.
Yes. In fact, BSD servers are. That's when, if you remember at the beginning, I was talking about I used Unix before I even met Linux, and it was BSD servers are what were hosting the dial-up modems at the community college, and that was my first introduction to any sort of Unix or Linux at all, was BSD. And now I mean, OS 10 is loosely based on BSD these days. It's pretty far away from BSD, but it's based on that. And also, if you, I don't know if you're familiar with pfSense, but pfSense is based on FreeBSD. A lot of the code that pfSense creates, they actually push up to the BSD distribution. So I'm a big pfSense fan. And when you learn,
the person who asked this question, Roberto Murillo, is an expert in pfSense. So when I saw the question, I definitely relate one thing to the other. So that's a pretty good one. Sorry, one just important comment about the certification that I see from El Primo, Manuel Florian, is that certification help you to get the job, but experience helps to keep it.
Yes, so exactly.
That's like the treatment. You gotta print that and put it in your,
yes,
in the backstage.
Yes.
Yep.
It's like going to college but never doing the homework.
Yeah. And sometimes if you get certification in a job, you can get a raise. And once you have a job, I often encourage people to train for certification. But if they're not going to get the benefit of a pay raise, a lot of times paying out of your own pocket for that certification, like for the paper that says you're certified, isn't as valuable as preparing by learning those things and practicing. So yeah,
that's awesome. Speaking about certifications, there's another thought about really Red Hat certifications, the RHCSA and the RHCE. What do you think about it? iExplore is asking.
So I encourage everybody who's curious about certifications to watch the video on my channel about certifications. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I posted it. Red Hat is funny. So when I worked at CBT Nuggets, Red Hat does not let you use their name. They're very protective of their intellectual property. So I actually did a course at CBT Nuggets to prepare for the Red Hat certification, but I had to call it CentOS administration, like preparation, because they wouldn't let me use the word Red Hat. So I think, especially if you are going into a position where they're using Red Hat, it's a no-brainer. It's vital.
Shawn, I remember that video course, and I remember you exactly.
Man, you love Shawn.
In the video, I remember exactly that. In the video, Shawn said, I cannot say their name, and he had to make signs and the hats,
I forgot about that, but yes, I did.
Fun. It was fun. I could imagine, of course, that was a problem of copyright. But
yeah,
it was so fun the way you handle it, because you cannot say the word. It's like the N word. You cannot say it because it's problematic. So it was just amazing. I remember that course.
Yeah, it was a strange situation, but it just covered all the objectives. And at that time, CentOS was the same as Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's not now. Red Hat is now Red Hat, Stream or something. I'm sorry, CentOS Stream.
Yes.
So now you have to use something like Rocky Linux, which
Rocky
is
Linux, yes.
Alma Linux.
Alma Linux too, and Vanity Fedora.
Yeah.
And Rocky, I think that there is this distribution called Rocky.
Rocky Linux, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's
Rocky,
if I teach
Rocky, Alma, and Oracle Linux are the ones that are competing for that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. In our case, we are good friends to Alma Linux. Jonathan and Victor already had some conversation with them, and that's it, colleagues. Feel free to use any distro you want, but if you want to use Alma Linux, we will encourage you to do that.
Last question, Shawn, before we conclude this. 3 Linux boot recommendation you would say for the users. Any book that you would say you can send someone there?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
For Linux 6, I mean.
He
has it right there.
Oh, he has it
right there, behind right there.
That's how you do it.
You need wireless earphones, apparently. So, Linux hardening and hostile networks. It's by It's by Kyle Rankin. He's a friend of mine. He also wrote for Linux Journal. If you're a Linux Journal fan, you remember Kyle Rankin. He's an incredible, he's probably the smartest system administrator I know. So any of his books are wonderful, but this one in particular is one that I find extremely valuable. And I am actually using this myself because over the next month, I have to go back to hosting all of my own email, because I'm going to be a little bit angry here, because Google is no longer giving the free G Suite. Like, I've had a G Suite, several G Suite domains for over 10 years. And all of a sudden Google says they're going to charge every month now. And I have multiples. I can't afford that. So I'm going to host my own email, and I'm going to use Kyle's book to help set up security on it. So
I will definitely do that too, because I was using the Google Workspace thing, and it's charging per hour per account. So
it's so frustrating.
Shawn, have you thought about writing a book?
I have. At this point, I haven't figured out what to write, which seems silly, I know, but yeah, I just don't know what to write. I love writing. Obviously, I wrote for a Linux Journal. You know, I write on my blog a lot. I don't know what book I would write.
I'll give you a hint. Start from the beginning.
From the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good in the beginnings. You're good for the starters.
Yes.
We have
Absolutely.
to say, it's been a pleasure have John with us. I know everybody have a agenda. Is late to the Dominican Republic. It's 9:31. Thanks, man. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you, to learn from you, to know
thank
your
you.
history. You have a beautiful history for us.
Oh yeah.
A beautiful man. Thanks for being here. I
Thank
don't
you so
know
much.
if Marcos, Luis, Jorge, Oscar, Montero, Yahaira, Diomedes want to say something.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure having you and learning from you, most of all, because yeah, your story has shown a lot of things that can be happening. Like Jorge said, people might make excuses to get something done, but you have shown that it's possible. You've forgotten everything and you start again from the zero all the way up. So stop, complain, no excuses. Like Jorge says, just get it done. Just do it.
And let me help you.
True.
Absolutely.
I mean, I must say that you are an inspiration for me. I'm not as inspired as Jonathan is today, but definitely I started watching your videos since 2010, and it's been a while. So having you here and being part of this community, having the first ever English talk in Dominican Republic about Linux, it's an honor.
It's an honor, indeed.
It's an honor for me to really to be the first. Maybe I can speak again sometime in person. Maybe.
But remember, you know how to speak in Spanish now. You can say "hello, okay."
Hey, we might have something coming down the pipe with Open Saturday.
Yeah. Hey, everybody wants show in the Open Saturday.
So, guys, before we leave, I gotta say, if you are new here and you may notice that we have some accents, please give it a chance. We are trying to.
Don't be hard on us.
Yeah, don't be too hard on us. English is not our first language. We speak Spanish, but we are doing this for you. Also, we gotta give it to Shawn. Thank you, Shawn, for being here with us tonight. I know you have a agenda full of things to do, but you took the time to try to speak to a non-English community, and but most of us speak English. Most of the people that was on YouTube speak English, and they really like it. We have a very active comments. Mostly that one we usually do. It was very active today. We have a lot of questions. Go, guys, if you're there in the chat in the YouTube, go to Shawn's channel, show some love, like his channel, subscribe to his channel. He's always available and willing to help. And any question you have, you can leave that question to Shawn in the comments, and he will reply back. Shawn, thank you for being here with us, guys. I don't know if you have any more comments to say before we leave? And that is John. Thank you for being here with us.
No, just
appreciate it.
Thanking Shawn.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much.
Say that he made us broke the record of most host per guest.
Yeah.
We're like,
we're the Brady Bunch here.
Thanks, Shawn. Recuerda, la mejor comunidad de la isla.
Linux Dominicana.
Dominicana.
Dominicana.